Joe Rogan and Bert Kreischer, two of comedy's biggest names, turned a routine stage appearance into a chaotic spectacle when they showed up completely hammered. Their slurred speech and incoherent jokes left the audience in stunned silence. Was this a comedic experiment gone wrong, or have they finally pushed the limits too far? The episode began with Joe Rogan and Bert Kreischer stepping onto the stage of Kill Tony, already in a state that could best be described as heavily intoxicated. You could tell right from the start that things were off. They had just come off a 5-hour podcast binge, and it was clear that alcohol had been flowing freely. From the moment they started speaking, their slurred speech and unsteady movements were impossible to ignore.
Appeared as guests on the 526th episode of Kill Tony, and Joe and Bert were absolutely hammered the entire time.
You know that feeling when you see someone who's had a bit too much to drink and they're trying to act normal, but it's just not working? That's exactly how it was. Rogan, usually sharp and quick-witted, stumbled over his words, delivering jokes that fell flat, while Kreischer, whose energy is typically infectious, was reduced to incoherent babble. The audience, who had likely tuned in expecting a night of laughs and witty banter, were met instead with a chaotic scene that felt more like a frat party gone wrong than a professional comedy show. The other guests on the show, along with the audience, seemed unsure of how to react. At first, there were some nervous chuckles, the kind you give when you're not sure if you should laugh or be concerned. But as the night wore on and the drunken antics continued, the mood in the room shifted from uncomfortable amusement to outright cringe. It was as if everyone was collectively holding their breath, waiting for the moment when it would all come crashing down. And oh boy, did it ever. As the episode progressed, Rogan and Kreischer's attempts at humor only got worse. There's a certain charm in being a bit tipsy and still managing to be funny, but this was far from that. Instead, what we witnessed were two comedians who had lost all sense of timing and delivery, stumbling over their words and each other in a desperate attempt to keep the show going.
Dom appeared to be sober, which only heightens the clash in moods between him and the increasingly sloppy Rogan and Kreischer.
Rogan, known for his sharp tongue and quick wit, seemed to forget all about subtlety, opting instead for a barrage of inappropriate jokes and random outbursts of profanity. At one point, he launched into a nonsensical rant about dick jokes that was met with awkward silence rather than the usual roars of laughter. It was clear that whatever comedic magic he usually possesses was buried deep under layers of alcohol.
This high-pitched pig squeal every couple of minutes that make you question your life choices for tuning in.
And, okay, so
Kreischer, on the other hand, seemed to be on a completely different planet. Every few minutes, he would let out a high-pitched pig squeal that pierced through the already shaky atmosphere, making everyone question what they were even watching. Instead of adding to the humor, these squeals only served to further disrupt the flow of the show, leaving the audience and the other guests visibly uncomfortable. It was almost painful to watch these two seasoned comedians, who normally know how to control a room, flounder in such a spectacular way. Their behavior not only failed to land any laughs, but also tarnished their usually well-crafted comedic personas. It was like seeing your favorite rock band give a terrible performance. You want to support them, but you can't ignore the fact that they're bombing. In the midst of this drunken disaster was Dom Herrera, a veteran comedian with decades of experience under his belt. Herrera, who has always been respected for his dry wit and sharp humor, was caught in the crossfire of Rogan and Kreischer's chaotic performance. From the moment they stumbled onto the stage, it was clear that Herrera was in for a rough night. Normally, Herrera's presence would have been a highlight of the show, but as soon as Rogan and Kreischer joined him, he was largely ignored, talked over, and relegated to the sidelines. There were moments where you could see Herrera trying to get a word in, only to be drowned out by Rogan's loud outbursts or Kreischer's squeals. It was uncomfortable to watch, a seasoned comedian being overshadowed by two drunken performers who seemed to forget they weren't the only ones on stage. Herrera's discomfort was palpable. You could see it in his body language, in the way he sat back and watched the train wreck unfold, likely wondering what he had gotten himself into. The clash in moods between Herrera, who appeared to be sober, and the increasingly sloppy Rogan and Kreischer was impossible to miss. It was like watching a wise old teacher trying to maintain order while the class clowns ran amok. The disrespect shown to Herrera was evident, and it was hard not to feel for the guy. Here was a comedian who had put in the work, only to be upstaged by two colleagues who should have known better. The generational and professional gap between Herrera and the duo was glaring, and it served as a reminder that no matter how big a star you are, there's still something to be said for maintaining a bit of decorum, especially when you're sharing the stage with a legend. From the moment Joe Rogan and Bert Kreischer stumbled onto the stage, the audience knew they were in for something different, though different quickly turned into disastrous. You could feel the energy in the room shift as the show progressed. At first, there were the typical laughs and cheers, but as Rogan and Kreischer's antics grew more chaotic and less coherent, those reactions turned into nervous laughter and awkward silence. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. You couldn't look away, even though you knew it was going to end badly. The live audience, who probably expected a night of sharp wit and hilarious banter, found themselves caught in the middle of a sloppy drunk fest. What was supposed to be a comedy show quickly devolved into a mess of slurred speech, nonsensical jokes, and offbeat squeals from Kreischer. The crowd, trying to make sense of it all, seemed torn between wanting to support the comedians and cringing at the spectacle unfolding before them. Some people might have thought it was all part of the act, but as the night wore on, it became clear that Rogan and Kreischer were just too drunk to deliver anything close to their usual performances. And then there was social media. Oh, how it loves a good scandal. As clips from the episode started circulating online, the reaction was swift and brutal. Fans and critics alike took to Twitter, Reddit, and other platforms to share their thoughts. And let's just say it wasn't pretty. People were either laughing at the sheer absurdity of it all or expressing their disappointment in seeing two of their favorite comedians in such a state. The hashtags were flying, and memes were being created in real time, amplifying the embarrassment on a global scale. The long-term effects on Rogan and Kreischer's reputations could be significant. While both are known for pushing boundaries and sometimes getting a little wild, this episode crossed a line from edgy to uncomfortable. Fans who admire their work might start questioning their professionalism, especially if this becomes a pattern rather than a one-off mistake. Comedy thrives on being unpredictable, but there's a difference between surprising your audience and disappointing them. If Rogan and Kreischer aren't careful, they risk alienating a portion of their fan base who tune in expecting top-tier humor, not a drunken train wreck. In the days following the episode, you'd expect some kind of damage control, right? Maybe an apology, an explanation, or at least a "we got a little carried away" statement. But from Rogan and Kreischer, there wasn't much in the way of public acknowledgement. It's as if they decided to ride out the storm, hoping that the next news cycle would bury the incident. And to be fair, in today's fast-paced media landscape, they might not be wrong. However, the silence, or lack of meaningful response, left fans and critics to fill in the gaps themselves. Some hardcore fans shrugged it off as just another wild night, the kind of thing you might expect from Rogan and Kreischer. After all, both comedians have built careers on being unapologetically themselves, flaws and all, but others weren't so forgiving. The episode was seen as a low point, a rare misstep in otherwise stellar careers. Critics pointed out that while being raw and real is part of their charm, there's a fine line between that and simply being unprofessional. The reception was divided. On one side, you had those who found the whole thing entertaining in a can't look away kind of way. These are the fans who enjoy watching Rogan and Kreischer push the envelope, even if it means sometimes crossing the line. On the other side, there were those who saw it as a disappointing display, a night where two seasoned comedians let their guard down a bit too much and lost the plot entirely. For them, it wasn't just a bad night. It was a sign that maybe, just maybe, Rogan and Kreischer need to dial it back. As for future appearances, this incident could have a ripple effect. Rogan and Kreischer might find that hosts and producers are more hesitant to book them, especially if there's alcohol involved. Their reputations as unpredictable and wild might make for good stories, but it could also make people think twice about inviting them to their shows. Of course, they both have massive followings and plenty of fans who'll stick by them no matter what. But the comedy world has a long memory, and this episode is one that won't be easily forgotten. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.